चर्चा करते हैं, क्योंकि इंडिया की Q2 जीडीपी के डेटा अभी फ्लैश हो चुके हैं। 5.6% की ग्रोथ देखने को मिली है और इसमें देखना होगा कि किस तरह का ब्रेकअप है और किस तरह से सेग्रीगेट डिमांड किस तरह की देखने को मिल रही है ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी में। इस खास मुद्दे पर बात करने के लिए हमारे साथ जुड़े हैं डॉक्टर सुनील कुमार सिन्हा, प्रिंसिपल इकोनॉमिस्ट हैं एंड सीनियर डायरेक्टर हैं आप इंडिया रेटिंग्स के। सुनील सर, वेरी गुड आफ्टरनून सर। सर बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया हमसे जोड़ने के लिए। सर, ये जीडीपी डेटा आपकी एक्सपेक्टेशंस के हिसाब से आया है या ये बिलो नॉर्मल है?
देखिए, हमारा एक्सपेक्टेशन 7.2% का था और जो एक्चुअल ग्रोथ नंबर्स जो सेकंड क्वार्टर के जीडीपी के आए हैं वो 5.6% हैं। सो डेफिनेटली ये ग्रोथ हमारी उम्मीद से काफ़ी कम है और हमारी जो उम्मीद 7.2% की थी उसमें कुछ चीज़ें जो शामिल थी वो ये थी। एक तो हमें ऐसा लग रहा था कि जो रिकवरी है सेकंड क्वार्टर में उसमें कुछ हद तक हमने मोमेंटम जो है हाई फ्रीक्वेंसी डेटा में देखा था, तो हमने सोचा शायद वो जो है हाई इसमें जीडीपी के डेटा में भी रिफ्लेक्ट होगा। पर हम ये देख रहे हैं कि उस किस्म की जो तस्वीर है वो उभर कर सामने नहीं आई है। अगर डिमांड साइड से देखें तो गवर्नमेंट का जो एक्सपेंडिचर है, जिसे हम गवर्नमेंट फाइनल कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर कहते हैं, वो काफ़ी कम रहा है सेकेंड क्वार्टर में। और अगर सप्लाई साइड से देखें तो सप्लाई साइड में जो खास करके इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर का परफॉर्मेंस है वो उम्मीद अपेक्षा के मुताबिक नहीं रहा है। तो इन दो वजहों से जो है वो जो जीडीपी नंबर है वो हमारे एक्सपेक्टेशन से कम आया है।
बिल्कुल सर, if we segregate this data in three segment like service sector, manufacturing and agri, सर कहाँ से सबसे ज्यादा डेंट लग रहा है इस जीडीपी ग्रोथ नंबर्स को?
देखिए, जो सबसे ज्यादा डेंट लगा है वो जो दो सेक्टर्स हैं, माइनिंग एंड क्वेरिंग एंड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, दोनों में ही जो है सेकेंड क्वार्टर में जो वाई ग्रोथ है वो नेगेटिव है। जहां तक सर्विसेज सेक्टर का सवाल है, सर्विसेज सेक्टर में जो है वो मोमेंटम काफी हद तक बरकरार है, क्योंकि अगर आप कम्युनिकेशन वाला जो कंपोनेंट है, ट्रेड, होटल और कम्युनिकेशन का कंपोनेंट, उसमें फर्स्ट क्वार्टर में 25.7% का ग्रोथ था, सेकेंड क्वार्टर में 14.7% का ग्रोथ है। तो कुछ हद तक तो पहले क्वार्टर में बेस इफेक्ट भी प्ले आउट हो रहा था, इसलिए अगर हम उसको नजरअंदाज कर दें तो भी सेकेंड क्वार्टर में 14.7% का ग्रोथ जो है कम्युनिकेशन, ट्रेड, ट्रांसपोर्ट में, ये एक अच्छी ग्रोथ है। फाइनेंशियल सेक्टर और सर्विसेज जो है उसमें भी 7.2% का ग्रोथ जो देखने को मिला है वो ठीक ठाक है। पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में जो ग्रोथ है वो काफी कम है, 6.5% है एज कम्पेयर टू फर्स्ट क्वार्टर। तो जैसा मैं पहले भी कह रहा था कि जो गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर है उसमें जो सेकेंड क्वार्टर में गिरावट आई है, और इन सब चीज़ों की वजह से अगर आप एक नज़र इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर पे और दूसरी नज़र सर्विसेज सेक्टर पे डालें तो जो चीज़ उभर कर आ रही है वो ये है कि इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर में रिकवरी थोड़ी पहले हो गई थी, पिछले फिस्कल में ही हो गई थी, और कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इंटेंसिव होने की वजह से सर्विसेज सेक्टर में रिकवरी जो है वो नहीं हो पाई थी, जो कि अब इस फिस्कल ईयर में फर्स्ट क्वार्टर में और सेकेंड क्वार्टर दोनों में साफ नजर आ रही है। परंतु उस किस्म का मोमेंटम जो है हमें इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर में देखने को नहीं मिल रहा है। एक वजह तो ये भी हो सकती है जो कि कमोडिटी प्राइसेस जो हैं उनमें जो उछाल आया है और उसकी वजह से जो कीमतों में इजाफा हुआ है, कुछ हद तक वो भी प्ले आउट हो रहा है, और दूसरी तरफ जो कंजम्पशन डिमांड है वो भी जो है बहुत ज़्यादा ब्रॉड बेस्ड नहीं है। तो ये दो चीज़ों की वजह से जो है ये थोड़ा सा हमें विरोधाभास देखने को मिल रहा है इंडस्ट्रियल रिकवरी में और सर्विसेज सेक्टर की रिकवरी में।
बिल्कुल। चलिए, अब हमारे साथ पीके बसु सर भी जुड़ चुके हैं। ही इज चीफ इकोनॉमिस्ट फ्रॉम ICICI सिक्योरिटीज। गुड इवनिंग सर एंड वेलकम टू आवर शो सर. Sir, your first take on the real GDP growth that is 5.6%. And sir, how do you see this Sir, you are on the mute mode. Please do unmute. Sir, आपका first take on this GDP growth number?
First of all, the growth is 6.3%. Real GDP growth is 6.3%. Nominal GDP growth is 16.7%. So, and what is striking is the strength of fixed investment spending. That is good news. We are continuing to see fixed investment spending lead the way in the economic recovery. So, आपके दर्शकों के लिए ये जानना चाहिए कि 6.3% की बढ़ती आई है this quarter. It's 6.3%, not 5.6. वो जो आप 5.6 बता रहे थे, वो that is a different
GVA.
That is
GVA at basic price.
GVA at basic prices. Anyway, that is not, there is a significant statistical discrepancy. The actual number is 6.3%.
Okay.
And also, I think it's important to understand that nominal GDP is growing over 16%. And I think in India's case, there is an underestimation of real GDP because we are using something similar to the WPI to measure, to use as the GDP deflator. And that, I think, is exaggerating the extent of inflation in the system. If you use CPI or something closer to the CPI, which is more appropriate for private consumption spending in particular, then I think you'll get a higher GDP number. So this has been an ongoing problem, but nonetheless, 6.3 is a decent number. It's broadly in line with expectations, and also, the striking thing for me is that the strength in fixed investment spending is good news because it suggests that we are likely to see growth being sustained as we go forward. We really need to see investment spending, particularly private investment spending, pick up and gain more strength.
Yes, sir. If we look at the data of private final consumption expenditure, sir, it's 58.4. If we compare it from the last quarter, then it was 59.9. So, what's the impact and what kind of variable have played in this quarter?
Well, basically, if you look at the growth rates, I'm just trying to quickly look at this. Yes, growth rates for real consumption spending are still quite significant. They are, you continue to see decent growth quarter on quarter, year on year. But yes, investment is playing a bigger part in driving growth rather than private consumption, and that is again largely consistent with what you've seen with things like the industrial production data. If you look at industrial production, the slowest, in fact, the area of continued contraction is consumer goods and particularly consumer non-durables. So that suggests that consumption hasn't fully recovered. Private consumption is recovering rather slowly. What is driving the economy at the moment is primarily fixed investment spending.
Okay. Sunil sir, जिस तरह का जो प्राइवेट कंजम्पशन है और जो क्रेडिट ग्रोथ के डेटा इस समय अगर हम ओवरऑल देखें अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस जीडीपी नंबर, लाइक हमने बैंकिंग सेक्टर में देखा बिकॉज जीडीपी इज समहाउ ए लैगिंग इंडिकेटर एज कंपेयर टू स्टॉक मार्केट इंडिकेटर्स, जो कि हमारे स्टॉक मार्केट में क्रेडिट ग्रोथ और बैंकिंग सेक्टर के रिजल्ट्स देखने को मिले. सर, क्रेडिट स्पेंडिंग और क्रेडिट ग्रोथ किस तरह से देखने को मिल रही है फॉर Q3 और क्या आउटलुक है आपका?
देखिए, फिलहाल तो जो क्रेडिट ग्रोथ है, जिसे हम नॉन फूड क्रेडिट ग्रोथ बोलते हैं, उसमें तो हमें अच्छी खासी बढ़त देखने को मिली है. परंतु जो समझने वाली बात है वो ये है कि ये क्रेडिट ग्रोथ जो है वो किस सेगमेंट से आ रहा है और कहाँ जा रहा है. लेकिन अगर आप उसको इस संदर्भ में देखने की कोशिश करें कि भाई जो एग्जैक्टली जो कंजम्पशन है, वो कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग की तरफ जा रहा है या कहीं और जा रहा है। तो उस समय जो स्थिति उभर कर आ रही है वो ये है कि जो कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग है उसमें भी जो है वो डाइकोटमी है। जो कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग हो रही है वो उन लोगों की तरफ से हो रही है जो कि हायर इनकम ब्रैकेट में आते हैं, और उनकी जो कंजम्पशन डिमांड है उनका नेचर भी डिफरेंट है। वो मोस्टली कंज्यूमर ड्यूरेबल्स, व्हीकल्स, कार जो है जैसे 4 व्हीलर्स हैं विच आर 10 lakhs एंड अबव, उनके ऊपर स्पेंडिंग ज्यादा हो रही है। लेकिन दूसरी तरफ जो है अगर आप कंज्यूमर नॉन ड्यूरेबल के ग्रोथ को देखें तो उन पे नहीं हो रही है। तो ये जो एक डाइकोटमी है ये प्ले आउट हो रही है, और इसका जो एक नतीजा है वो ये है कि जो ओवरऑल कंजम्पशन डिमांड है वो अभी भी स्क्यूड है, वो ब्रॉड बेस्ड नहीं है। और जब तक के कंज्यूमर और कंजम्पशन डिमांड ब्रॉड बेस्ड नहीं होती है तब तक ये उम्मीद करना कि ये एक सस्टेनेबल जो है डिमांड में कन्वर्ट होगी, ये बड़ा मुश्किल है। तो हमें उम्मीद है कि ये जो फेस्टिवल सीजन जैसे ही खत्म होता है या विच इज ऑलमोस्ट कमिंग टू एन एंड, तो आप जिस किस्म का उछाल जो है कंज्यूमर ड्यूरेबल्स में या जो इसमें क्या कहते हैं बोरोइंग में देखेंगे, खास करके हाउस होल्ड बोरोइंग में, वो आपको उतना नहीं दिखेगा आने वाले में।
जी बासु सर, your estimates for
सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है आपका? हेलो,
sorry for the interruption, sir. There was some internet job, so we'll be recording from now onwards. Amit, can we start again? Amit? Okay. Basu sir, again, sorry for the interruption. And Basu sir, coming back to you, sir. Sir, what's your estimate for the Q3 GDP data and for the entire year, sir?
Well, I think Q3 will be a little bit better. We'll see slightly better numbers, particularly for industrial growth, and that'll be helped by the fact that export duties were removed on steel products, iron ore, and have been reduced for petroleum products. So that should help the industrial growth numbers pick up and also contribute to better exports. So I think we'll get a better number for the next quarter. For the full year, I'm still looking at over 7% real GDP growth. Now, I think what to me is the most striking here is that in the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year, we've had about 15% growth in real fixed investment spending. And in this quarter, real private consumption is now reported to have grown 9.7%. So while we were concerned, in my previous remarks, I was concerned about private consumption not picking up much. The actual data shows 9.7% growth, which is quite decent. Obviously, a lot of the private consumption is on services more than on goods, because consumer goods output is not really picking up. So consumption services is what has benefited more, and we are seeing that in the production side of the GDP as well. The services sector is what is driving the strength of the economy. Although I think manufacturing may be slightly underestimated because of the deflator. The deflator is perhaps over-reported. Anyway, it's also worth noting that in real terms, that is inflation-adjusted terms, export growth in the latest quarter, exports of goods and services was plus 11.5%. Imports was even stronger, of course, up 25%. So net exports is actually detracting somewhat from growth, but the export story remains somewhat intact, despite the fact that India had imposed some debilitating export duties that hurt the iron and steel and engineering goods sector. Now, if you look at iron and steel, in normal times, iron and steel and product exports are more than 10% of India's goods exports. So since there was such a steep export duty in place, that whole complex was held down in the second quarter. Going forward, we'll see some improvement there because there clearly is very strong global demand for steel. We're beginning to see a decent recovery in demand around the world, despite the recessionary conditions in Europe and a potential recession down the road in the US. So the real issue with steel globally is that steel production everywhere except India, China, and Iran is down so far this year. Since it appears that there's been some permanent damage done to steel capacities across most of the major steel producers around the world, India is one of the few places that is intact, that has a robust and stable steel sector. So I think we'll see that improve, and other areas like aluminium, etc. too. We'll see improved numbers going forward. So I'd say that we are continuing to see the Indian economy hold up a lot better than the rest of the world. 6.3% real GDP growth is still a very good number. And if you look at the first two quarters together, growth is a little over 10%. So the first half of the fiscal year, we've had 10% real GDP growth, and the second half, if you're looking at 5% in the second half, you'll get to over 7% for the full year. The reason why we won't get to 7.5 immediately with 5% in the second half is that the fourth quarter is the biggest quarter. Seasonally, that is a much bigger quarter in terms of output, and so you need that quarter to hold up better. But I think we are still very much on track to see real GDP growing more than 7% for the full fiscal year.
So, sir, what could be the impact on interstate path in Indian economy when the RBI governor is going to announce its monetary policy on 7th of this December month? So, what could be the mind frame? If you are going at 6.3% in this quarter, and then the outlook is bright. So, do you think कि उनके माइंड में कुछ होगा कि ठीक है डरना है या नहीं डरना है क्योंकि growth rate is not disturbed by these kind of measures?
डरने की कोई बात नहीं है. जो इन्फ्लेशन है वो और धीमी गति हो रहा है. If you look at the inflation rate, it's coming down a bit, and पिछले महीने के तुलना में इस महीने की जो इन्फ्लेशन रेट है, that should be closer to 6%, just over 6%. पिछले महीना हमने देखा है कि 7% से कम था, 6.7%. तो इस महीना we've seen the November, इस महीने में हम देखे हैं कि खरीफ crops were very robust. तो अगर जब डिलीवरीज आते हैं तो food prices will moderate, And we're seeing that already. I think there's a fair amount of evidence that this month, since the second half of this month, we've seen a clear moderation in food prices in India. And globally, there's been a moderation in commodity prices. So हमारे लिए वो दोनों तरफ से सही न्यूज़ है कि सही संवाद आ रहा है कि prices हमारे domestic prices भी कम हो रहा है और international commodity prices are also coming down. So it's all to the good.
Right, sir. Sir,
so that means that the RBI must raise interest rates. It has to raise, okay. But it will probably raise interest rates more moderately by about 35 basis points, taking the repo rate to 6.25%. So 6.25% will ensure that by December, we will have a positive real policy rate. It is very rare in the world right now to have a positive real policy rate. अगर आप यूरोप के तरफ देखें तो वहाँ पे real policy rate is about -7 or 8 or 9, -7 or 8%. तो उनके तुलना में हमारे जो real rate है, it's almost zero. I think this month will be slightly above, slightly negative. By next month, once we get to 6.25% for the actual repo rate, and inflation moderates probably to slightly below 6.2% in December, we'll have a positive real rate. And certainly by January and February, our real rates will be significantly positive because inflation should moderate to below 6% in January, February. So RBI would finally have, will stop sweating because they'll be back within the inflation target of 2 to 6%, which they haven't been. I think the whole of this calendar year, inflation has been outside the RBI's targeted range, but the RBI is not alone. I mean, all central banks have missed their inflation targets by quite a lot.
So that was the only plea with the RBI, sir?
Pardon me?
That was the only plea with the RBI that they're just maintaining the...
It was a real plea because, they weren't alone. Everybody, very few central banks were able to achieve their inflation target. And some central banks missed the inflation target by a huge amount. The US has been missing the inflation target for the last 18 months. They have a core PCE inflation target of 2%. They are way above that. Consistently so for almost 2 years. So the European Union, ECB, is, as I said, their target is 2%, not for core inflation, but for headline inflation. And they are in double digits.
Double digits. Yes.
Britain, BOE, has 11% inflation. So every central bank is missing targets by a lot. And so the RBI is not alone, and that's a perfectly reasonable plea that we are not the only ones, and India cannot go out on a limb and aggressively tighten ahead of everybody else. If India were to do that, then we could start attracting a lot of unnecessary capital inflows as well. If we tighten too far ahead of the rest of the world. And so, that might actually undermine the policy goal. So, so there's a good argument. I mean, it's a good plea that the RBI has.
It's underperformance. Great, sir. If we look at the interest rate cycle, we have just seen that the interest rate in US have significantly up since last three monetary policies there, 75 basis point every time. And now the Fed meeting is going to happen on 14th or 15th of December next month. So how do you see the US interest rate cycle as compared to a global cycle? Do you think that the peak is there because the inflation is moderating in US also?
Yeah, well, inflation is moderating in the US. But remember, the US we in India have a 2 to 6% inflation target for headline CPI inflation, 2 to 6. The US has a 2% inflation target for core PCE inflation. Now, core PCE inflation right now is still at 4.6%. It's moderated from 4.9 to 4.6, but that is still too high. That is way, way above their target. So I think that India is going to see a peak in the current rate hike cycle at the December meeting. So December will be the last rate hike for several months. And so India doesn't need to hike further because we'll have a positive real policy rate from January onwards. By March, it'll be perhaps as much as plus 1% or maybe even more, which basically means that inflation will be around 5 for India, CPI inflation. So for India, the last rate hike of this cycle is about to happen in a week's time. For the US, there's still more rate hikes to come. I think in December, they'll raise by 50 basis points, and they will raise further and take the Fed funds rate to 5% by March next year. Now, March next year at 5%, they will still be at negative real interest rates. So they'll have to keep it at 5% for about 6 months in order for inflation to gradually moderate. And part of that moderation will be because the US economy will enter recession by the second quarter of next year. So it enters recession, and that enables the economy to squeeze out the remaining inflationary problem. And then, towards the end of next year, fourth quarter of 2023, the US could again be looking at the possibility of perhaps even cutting rates if they have wrestled inflation down. So that's going to be the story. But it's a tough road ahead. Whereas for India, the inflation would have come back within the target range by the next quarter, January to March quarter, and thereafter India doesn't need to tighten much further. I don't think India will be in a hurry to ease, but 6.25 is probably going to stay for a while, and wait for inflation to come down. Now, if oil prices stay low, now I think there's a risk factor with oil, and that is that next week OPEC
meeting is happening.
OPEC Plus is about to do another meeting, and they may try to restrict production. Plus, you have the Europeans banning imports of oil from early next month from Russia. So if really you see all of this happening, plus some attempts at capping the price of Russian oil and gas, all of this is potentially very disruptive. Now, disruptive in the sense that Russia may curtail exports to Europe further, and that will force Europe to seek more oil and gas from the rest of the world. So there are some risk factors in December, major risk factors with the oil market. But at the moment, the oil market is moving very much in India's favor. Oil prices are coming down because the oil markets are beginning to focus on the fact that global demand is coming off, that the Chinese economy is entering further period of weakness, especially because the attempt at opening up the economy post-COVID is causing a third wave of COVID to hit China. And so, that basically means there's a lot of disruptions to the Chinese economy, disruptions to demand, and so oil prices are, that's helping to reduce oil prices right now. But yeah, oil is a big risk factor in the period ahead.
So last question, what could be the impact of Chinese lockdown on the commodity cycle? Like we have seen that in last few weeks, because there is a surge in third wave, as you just mentioned. Like in China, there are so many lockdowns, so people are just fighting with the government. So if there are some easing of the lockdown, so in China, then what could be the impact on commodity prices internationally?
Well, the easing of the lockdown, if it is really eased. You see, now what is happening now is China is easing the lockdown, and that is triggering a burst of new infections in a number of cities, and the city governments are then cracking down. So while the central government is attempting to ease, city governments are often quick to shut down at the first hint of a new COVID wave. So that is going to be a struggle in China for some time, and of course it is causing a lot of unrest in China. So what is likely to happen is that China will crack down on the protesters. It's cracking down very hard already, and at the same time, what they will do is quietly concede the protesters' demands. They'll quietly tell provincial governments and city governments to ease up and not lock down again at the first hint of trouble. So that instruction is likely to go out. So I think the next month or so will still be very disruptive. Now, this month is very important for production around the world because you get the so-called Christmas demand surging in the US and Western Europe, etc. So China will probably not be able to fulfill that, which basically creates an opportunity for alternatives to China. And there really are two. India and Vietnam are the two main alternative suppliers. And we cannot fulfill all the China demand. But if even 10 or 15% of China's production is disrupted by this COVID phenomenon, then India will see a significant boost to export numbers in December, and that'll provide an additional boost to us. Now, beyond that, commodity prices, if China's economy remains weak,
so यहाँ पर बासु sir, there was some interruption, so please carry on.
Yeah. So if you get that boost, in terms of disruptions in the Chinese economy, then the commodity prices will come down further in December, and that'll be good for India. But I think the main benefit is that we'll be able to see more exports replacing some of the disrupted production out of China. Now, beyond December, January, I think that China will probably get a grip on COVID and will also open the economy up. But of course, January is another really important month for Chinese demand because domestically, that's the Chinese New Year period. You get a lot of disruptions there. So I think, this period over the next 2 months, if there are serious disruptions in China, it will create more opportunities for India. It'll create a period of dampened commodity prices. So India has a dual benefit. Exports strengthen and import prices come down. What could be better?
Perfect, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your precious time. और जैसा कि बासु सर ने बताया कि इंडियन इकोनॉमी बहुत अच्छा कर रही है और आगे भी आउटलुक अच्छा है. इंटरेस्ट रेट की जो साइकिल है इंडिया में एटलीस्ट वो अपने पीक की तरफ पहुंच चुकी है और जो हम दिसंबर में रेट हाइक देखेंगे प्रोबेबली ये एक लास्ट रेट हाइक हो सकता है आरबीआई की तरफ से, क्योंकि हम जो रियल इंटरेस्ट रेट है वो पॉजिटिव साइड पर आता हुआ देख रहे हैं एज कम्पेयर टू यूएस यूरोप, जहां पर कि अभी भी 5 या 6% का नेगेटिव रियल रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट चल रहा है. कमोडिटी साइकिल एक थोड़ा सा रिस्क है, उसमें खासतौर से क्रूड ऑयल एक मेजर रोल प्ले करने वाला है, जिसपे कि ओपेक की मीटिंग होने जा रही है 4 दिसंबर को वियना में, जहां पर कि अगर कुछ भी प्रोडक्शन कट होता है और या कुछ भी सप्लाई को लेकर कुछ इश्यूज बनते हैं आगे इंटरनेशनली, तो ये कमोडिटी प्राइसेस को थोड़ा सा अपसाइड पर ला सकते हैं, जिसका इम्पैक्ट इंडियन इकोनॉमी पर थोड़ा सा पड़ सकता है। तो वो एक रिस्की फैक्टर होगा, अदरवाइज इंडियन इकोनॉमी बहुत अच्छा करिए। थैंक यू वेरी मच सर फॉर योर काइंड वर्ड्स एंड बहुत अच्छा लगा आपसे बात करके। थैंक यू वेरी मच। थैंक यू। तो फिलहाल जीडीपी आंकड़ों से इतना ही, जुड़े रहिए हमारे साथ और हम बताते रहेंगे इसी तरह के कुछ अपडेट्स में किस तरह के जीडीपी डेटा आते हैं, स्टॉक मार्केट के मूवमेंट, सभी चीजों पर जानकारी जारी रहेगी। नमस्कार, थैंक यू।